Hi. This chapter is about communication and how we can connect based off of communication with different people and relationships that we have. I want you to remember that communication is not one-sided. It actually is a turn-taking process. We have to realize that also that there's typically it's not one-way communication. If I see a person that's in the back, and if I'm lecturing, and I see a visual cue, I realize that that's language that's being communicated with me. That's anger, and that is the form of communication. When we talk about the communication process, what I find to be fascinating is that in the communication process, English meaning, only 6% of it is words. 39% is vocal intonation, and 55% of communication is with gestures, body language, and facial expressions. Can you imagine that? It's based off of that kind of communication. That is amazing. Remember, we learned sign, we learned about the deaf world, but we have communicated our whole lives based off this communication process. It's staggering, right? Now, when we communicate, we actually have 3 common things that affect our communication. The first thing is noise, meaning external noise, like if somebody's doing construction outside, if someone has a pen and they keep clicking it, if someone keeps burping a whole bunch, if the lights flicker off and on, those are all external noises. If you hear the AC running, that is also an external noise, and it can interfere with your communication, becomes a distraction. Then you have psychological noise, which means your inner thoughts, your inner pressures. Like if you had just broken up with your boyfriend and you're upset, emotionally distraught, you'll already have those battle scars. And it'll affect you psychologically, and it'll come up while you're trying to communicate or if you're interpreting. And if somebody says something about a boyfriend or something, that will hit home, and it'll make you cry, and it could affect you psychologically. So that's psychological noise. The other one is physiological noise. That means, like, if you're really hungry, it's like those physical aches. If you're starved, or if you have a cold and you feel sick, you go to interpret and you just don't feel good. Or if you have a cold and you just can't hear right because your ears are all stuffy and you're trying to interpret, you'll struggle quite a bit through the interpretation because those are all physiological noises. So those are the 3 distractions that occur in communication. Next, we're going to talk about communication competence. Understand that communication is not 100% perfect. If that was true, then there would never be a divorce or a fight or any misunderstandings. There are many errors with communication, and this is something, it is fraught with errors and problems. And what's interesting is there are a lot of interpreters out there in the world. Our job is to solely communicate, but yet in our real lives, our everyday lives, we fail in communication often. It's ironic. When we communicate, we have a sender, and a person who's actually hearing and getting the message is considered to be the receiver. So if I'm giving you the message, you're receiving that information. And then that reverses, and then the other person becomes the sender, and then I become the receiver. So you see, we go back and forth. That's how we encode language. There are several different layers to the message. So we also have to mentally read the language, meaning we have to look at all of the different aspects of those layers, see the intonation or hear the intonation, and the words might not always match the communication that's happening visually. So it's very important that we understand how to encode the message. Now, what else is interesting is when we're talking about communication processes, now we have our own like personal history or experiences, your life experiences. So if you've met that person, you might have background information of that person. Or sometimes you meet that person for the first time and you don't have that, so the expectations will be different for each person. If you know that person's culture and you know this other person's culture, you'll know that the behavior is going to be significantly different and their communication will be different as well, how you handle that. So you need to make sure that you are also looking at that from those two perspectives. We also have people that we know that we have established relationships with. Maybe we've met them before. Like if you are with your group of educators, your friends that are just in my business world, they're all cohorts, right? But if I hang out with my friends that I grew up with, my speech will be totally different because in the educational environment, my word choice would be way different than what my boos would be or my friends that I've grown up with all their life. It'd be way different. There are several requisites that you need to be a sign language interpreter. You need to be able to listen effectively and think analytically. I always spell this wrong, so let me make sure I spell it right. You need to make sure while you're thinking analytically, you're listening effectively. Then you also need to have fluency in signed, spoken, and written forms of language and how they're used. You need to have interpersonal skills, meaning that you can get along with other people, you're able to negotiate yourself around situations. If you're not able to do that, this is not the great field for you. Sensitivity. And I'm not saying that you have to be sensitive in a way that, oh, you have to be empathetic for everything. No, you have to be sensitive of other people's perspectives as well as other people's cultures. If you think that your way is the only way, then this field is probably not the best field to be in for you. When we talk about cultural competence, that's the last prerequisite. That's meaning that you know your culture and you understand other people's cultures and you have competence in it so that you can understand specific behaviors and understand all those different cultures out there. When we think about the requirements for being an interpreter, now we're going to actually move on to think about the process involved. So we apply all those prerequisites to us as an interpreter to be an effective interpreter, but then we also have to think about communication and the layers that are involved. So we think about, okay, the pragmatics. So if I'm going to interpret, who is actually speaking? Who's that person speaking for, and what environment? Am I in my friend environment or am I in an educational environment? And how are the words going to be used during that time? The words will be significantly different based off of one place or another place. My signs or word choice would be significantly different. I mean, the signs might necessarily show up exactly the same in both settings, but you would use different words for that match of the signs. Also, tonality or how you speak. If you're with your friends, sometimes you're louder, maybe wilder. But if you're in an educational setting, your tone would be significantly muted or restrained. Sometimes if you think about turn taking, right, during that communication time, it's not just a one-way street where people tell me what to do and it becomes like I'm the elevator operator, I'll push the buttons, you tell me. and I'll do it. No, we have that communication that goes back and forth between two people or more people. Now we're going to talk about message construction and how that comes about. Remember, anytime that I go to interpret, okay, anytime you go to interpret, you have to think about the speaker's goal. Like, for example, for me, I'm your educator. My goal is to teach you. So if an interpreter shows up, they'll know that I am here to teach. So they'll know my goal is the same every day that I go. And they know that I will not be using specific street language, but I'll use educational information and educational language. And I'll also have to make sure that we have context of a message and the conveyance, meaning it's very clear information. The other construction that has to do with message construction is the degree of directness. How direct am I when I'm speaking to you? Also, we have to think about powerful and powerless speech. We talked about responsible language and then linguistic register. So all of those are a part of message construction. Those are all the layers that affect everything that's involved with the message process. So when you think about a speaker, the speaker's goal might be having fun, it might be wanting to help other people, it might want to be wanting to cause more inclusion or get more inclusion, sorry. It might be making you upset. Maybe they're speaking about relaxation. Maybe it's about informing or influencing. Now, if you think about influencers, Hitler was a good example of a person who was influencing a lot of people. If you think about Oprah, she inspires people to change. If you think about something that would maybe put you off, you could think about Ozzy Osbourne. I'm spelling it wrong. Ozzy Osbourne. He, a long time ago, I don't know if you know, he made people really upset. Just like with Marilyn Manson, a lot of people got disgusted with his behavior, or they got really angry because of that music. So that's how it affects us. That's the speaker's goals. Now we're going to talk about the context of the message conveyance. Okay, so when we think about the players involved, okay, we think about who is involved with this communication. What's their status? Are we on the equal playing field, or does that person have more status than me? Like for an instructor or a professor, that instructor has more status than the students. And eventually, once they graduate and the students are in their own job, in their own workplace, typically the statuses change.